The clock on the wall read 9:47 p.m., and Maya's feet were screaming at her. She'd been on them since 6 that morning, running between tables at Betty's diner like her life depended on it. Which honestly it kind of did. She leaned against the counter for just a second, rolling her aching shoulders. Through the front window she could see snow starting to fall on the Chicago streets. It was the kind of cold that went straight through your coat and settled in your bones. The kind of night when all you wanted was to be home, curled up under a blanket. "Thank God we're almost done," Kelly muttered from behind the register, already counting her tips. "I've got plans tonight." Maya didn't bother responding. She didn't have plans. She never had plans anymore. Her plans consisted of getting home, checking on Sophie, paying the babysitter, and collapsing into bed for maybe 5 hours before doing it all over again. Being a single mom at 28 wasn't exactly what she'd dreamed about when she was younger. But life had a funny way of writing its own script, didn't it? Sophie's dad had left when she was pregnant. Her parents had passed away years before, and here she was, just trying to keep her head above water. The bell above the door chimed. Maya looked up and felt her heart sink a little. An old man was shuffling through the door, moving slowly like each step took real effort. He wore a jacket that had seen better days, thin and worn at the elbows. His pants were slightly too big, held up with a belt that had extra holes punched in it. Everything about him looked tired. "Are you kidding me?" Kelly hissed under her breath. "It's 10 minutes to closing." Tony, the cook, poked his head through the kitchen window. "We're shutting down back here." Maya watched the old man look around nervously like he wasn't sure if he should stay or go. His eyes were kind, though. Sad but kind. Something about the way he stood there so uncertain reminded her of her own grandfather before he died. "I've got him," Maya said quietly, grabbing a menu. Kelly shot her a look. "You're too nice for your own good, you know that?" Maybe she was. But Maya remembered what it felt like to be on the other side, to walk into a place and wonder if you were welcome. When money was tight and you weren't sure if you belonged anywhere fancy or nice. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible. She walked over with a smile that wasn't forced. "Hi there. Welcome to Betty's. Sit wherever you'd like." The old man's face lit up just a little. "Thank you, miss. I know it's late. I won't be long." "Take your time," Maya said, gesturing to a booth by the window. "No rush." He settled into the booth slowly, his movements careful like everything hurt. Maya noticed his hands shaking slightly as he opened the menu. He studied it for a long moment, and she could almost see him doing math in his head. When she came back with water, he looked up at her. "Just coffee, please. And maybe, do you have toast?" "Of course," Maya said, writing it down. The total would be maybe $3. She glanced at his worn jacket again, the way he'd carefully folded it beside him like it was precious. In the kitchen, Tony was already wiping down the grill. What did he order? "Coffee and toast," Tony shook his head. "That's it? On a night like this?" Maya looked back through the window at the old man. He sat very still, his hands folded on the table, watching the snow fall outside. There was something about him that tugged at her heart. Not pity exactly, more like recognition, like looking at someone who was carrying something heavy and trying their best not to show it. She made a decision. "Tony, is there any of that meatloaf left? And mashed potatoes?" "Yeah, but I was about to toss it." "Don't make me a plate." "A good one." Tony raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He knew Maya well enough by now. 5 minutes later, she had a full plate, warm and generous. Coffee, toast, meatloaf, potatoes, green beans, and a slice of apple pie. She carried it all to the booth and set it down in front of the old man. He stared at it, confused. "I'm sorry, miss. I only ordered coffee and toast." "I can't. I don't have enough for all this," Maya smiled. "The kitchen made extra tonight. It was just going to go to waste." "Please take it." The old man looked up at her and she saw his eyes getting shiny. "Are you sure?" "Completely sure. Can't let good food go in the trash, right?" He nodded slowly and his voice came out rough. "Thank you. You're very kind." Maya went back to her closing duties, wiping down tables and refilling salt shakers. But she kept glancing over at the booth. The old man ate slowly, carefully, like he was savoring every single bite. He sat up a little straighter after a while, and some color came back to his face. Kelly finished counting the register and grabbed her coat. "I'm out. Don't stay too late." "See you tomorrow," Maya called after her. The diner was quiet now, just Maya, the old man, and the sound of snow hitting the windows. She finished her cleaning and noticed his plate was empty. When she went to clear it, he was staring out at the street with a distant look in his eyes. "Can I get you anything else?" Maya asked gently. He looked up at her. "No, thank you. That was the best meal I've had in a very long time." He paused. Would you mind sitting for just a minute, if you're not too busy?" Maya glanced at the clock. It was past closing, but something in his voice made her say yes. She slid into the booth across from him. "I'm Richard," he said, extending a shaky hand. "Maya." She shook his hand carefully. His grip was weak but warm. "Do you have family, Maya?" She smiled, thinking of Sophie. "I have a daughter. She's 6. Her name's Sophie." Richard's whole face softened. 6 is a wonderful age. My granddaughter was 6 once. Seems like yesterday." He got quiet for a moment. "I lost my wife this year. 43 years we were married." "I'm so sorry," Maya said and meant it. "Thank you." He looked down at his hands. "You learn a lot about people when you're alone. About who really sees you. Most people, they look right through you when you're old or when you don't look important. Like you're not even there." Maya nodded. She knew exactly what he meant. She'd felt invisible plenty of times in her life. "But you," Richard continued, meeting her eyes, "you saw me. You treated me like I mattered. And you have no idea how much that means." There was something in the way he said it that made Maya's throat tight. "Everyone matters, Richard. Everyone deserves kindness," he smiled then. A real smile that reached his eyes. "Your daughter is very lucky to have you." They talked for a few more minutes about small things. The weather, the city, stories about their families. When Richard finally stood to leave, he moved a little easier than when he'd come in. Maybe it was just the warm food. Maybe it was something else. Maya walked him to the door. "Be careful out there." "It's cold." "I will. Thank you, Maya. For everything." She watched him walk down the snowy street until he disappeared around the corner. When she went back to clear his table, she found a $5 bill under his plate, which was more than the coffee and toast would have cost. There was also a napkin with words written in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for seeing me." Maya folded the napkin carefully and put it in her apron pocket. She didn't know why, but something told her to keep it. As she locked up the diner and headed out into the cold night, she thought about Richard walking alone through the snow. She hoped he'd get home safe. She hoped he'd be warm. She hoped he knew that their conversation had meant something to her too. The snow fell heavier now, covering the city in white. Maya pulled her coat tighter and headed for the bus stop, already thinking about Sophie, about homework and bedtime stories, about tomorrow's shift and the bills that never stopped coming. She had no idea that tonight in that quiet little diner, something had shifted. That one simple act of kindness given freely without expecting anything in return had touched someone in a way she couldn't imagine. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever. But that night, as she rode the bus home through the snowing streets of Chicago, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like maybe, just maybe, there was still good in the world, and maybe she was part of it. The napkin in her pocket felt warm against her side, like a little secret between her and the universe. "Thank you for seeing me," it said. And somewhere across the city, an old man sat in his home, writing in a leather journal with tears in his eyes, remembering what it felt like to be seen, to be human, to matter. 2 weeks later, everything would change. 2 weeks had passed since that snowy night, and Maya had almost forgotten about Richard. Almost, but not quite. She still had that napkin tucked in her wallet, though she couldn't really explain why she kept it. Life had gone back to its normal rhythm. Wake up, get Sophie ready for school. Rush to the diner, smile at customers, count tips, go home exhausted, repeat. It was a Tuesday afternoon and the lunch rush had just ended. Maya was refilling ketchup bottles when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up out of habit and froze. A man in an expensive 3-piece suit stood in the doorway, looking completely out of place in Betty's diner. His shoes probably cost more than Maya made in a month. He had a leather briefcase in one hand and was scanning the room with careful eyes. Kelly whispered from behind the register, "Is he lost or something?" The man walked straight to the counter. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Maya Rodriguez." Maya's heart did a little flip. Nobody ever came looking for her, especially not men in $1,000 suits. Her first thought was panic. Had something happened to Sophie? But no, the school would have called her directly. "I'm Maya," she said, wiping her hands on her apron nervously. The man's expression softened. Miss Rodriguez, my name is David Chen. I'm an attorney with Morrison and Associates downtown. He pulled out a business card and handed it to her. Is there somewhere we could talk privately? Maya's mouth went dry. An attorney? Her mind raced through possibilities. Bills she couldn't pay? Some kind of legal trouble she didn't know about? We can use the back office, I guess, she said, looking at her boss Betty, who was watching from the kitchen with concern. Betty nodded. Go ahead, honey. Take your time. Maya led David Chen to the tiny office behind the kitchen. It was barely big enough for a desk and 2 chairs, cluttered with invoices and supply orders. She sat down, her hands shaking slightly. David Chen sat across from her and opened his briefcase. Miss Rodriguez, do you remember meeting a man named Richard about 2 weeks ago? An elderly gentleman who came in late one evening? Maya's eyes widened. Yes, I remember Richard. Is he okay? The attorney's face grew somber. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Richard Wellington passed away 3 days after he met you. It was a heart attack. He went peacefully in his sleep. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She felt tears spring to her eyes immediately. What? No, We talked. He was fine. I know this is shocking, David said gently, pulling out a tissue box and sliding it toward her. But I need to tell you something else. Something that's going to be even more surprising. Maya dabbed at her eyes, trying to process. That kind old man was gone. She'd only known him for an hour, but somehow it hurt. Really hurt. The Richard Wellington you met, David continued carefully. His full name was Richard Theodore Wellington III. Perhaps you've heard of Wellington Properties? Maya shook her head. The name meant nothing to her. Richard Wellington was one of the wealthiest men in Chicago. He owned Wellington Properties, one of the largest real estate development companies in the Midwest. He was worth approximately $3.2 billion. Maya stared at him. Then she laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. I'm sorry, what? That can't be right. He was just a regular person. His clothes were old. He ordered coffee and toast because that's all he could afford. David pulled out a photograph from his briefcase and slid it across the desk. It showed a distinguished older man in an expensive tuxedo, standing next to a beautiful woman in a ball gown. They were at some kind of fancy event, smiling for the camera. Maya picked up the photo with trembling hands. Even in the fancy clothes, she recognized those kind, sad eyes. It was Richard. Her Richard from that snowy night. I don't understand, she whispered. After his wife passed away last year, Richard became quite depressed, David explained. He felt isolated. He told his closest friends that he wasn't sure if anyone had ever actually cared about him, or if they just cared about his money. So he started doing something unusual. Maya looked up from the photograph. He would dress like someone who didn't have much, and visit different places around the city. Restaurants, shops, parks. He wanted to see how people treated him when they thought he was nobody important, when they thought he had nothing to offer them. Maya's hand went to her mouth. Oh my God. According to his personal assistant, he visited dozens of places over several months. Most people ignored him. Some were rude. A few were kind, but in a distant way. But you... David pulled out another document. You were different. He opened a leather journal, and Maya recognized Richard's shaky handwriting. David turned it so she could see. This is from his personal journal. He wrote this the night he met you. David began to read. Tonight I met someone who restored my faith. Her name is Maya, and she works at a diner on West Madison. She didn't just serve me food. She saw me. She sat with me. She talked to me like I was a person worth talking to. She gave without expecting anything back. For the first time since Helen died, I felt human again. I felt seen. This young woman, who clearly has her own struggles, still had enough heart to care about an old stranger. If there are people like her in the world, maybe there's still hope. Tears were streaming down Maya's face now. She couldn't stop them. Miss Rodriguez, David said quietly. Richard went home that night and called me first thing the next morning. He made changes to his will. Significant changes. Maya's breath caught. Why are you telling me this? Because you're in that will. The tiny office suddenly felt like it was spinning. Maya gripped the edge of the desk. What? David pulled out an official-looking document. Richard Wellington left you $2 million. The words didn't make sense. They were just sounds. Maya shook her head. No, that's not possible. I barely knew him. I just gave him dinner. That's all. Just dinner. You gave him more than that, David said. You gave him dignity. You gave him kindness when you had no reason to. No expectation of reward, and it meant everything to him. Maya stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back. This is crazy. I can't accept that. His family, they must think I'm some kind of con artist or something. His only living relatives are some distant cousins who he hadn't spoken to in years, David said. But yes, they've already begun contesting the will. They're claiming you manipulated him somehow. Maya felt sick. I didn't, I swear, I had no idea who he was. I know that, David said firmly. And the will is ironclad. Richard was of completely sound mind. We have documentation of his intentions, his journal entries, even testimony from his personal assistant who knew about his, let's call it his kindness experiment. He'd been planning this for months. If someone showed him genuine compassion, he wanted to reward that. There was a knock on the door. Betty poked her head in, looking worried. Maya, honey, are you okay? What's going on? David stood and handed Maya his card again. I know this is overwhelming. You don't need to make any decisions right now, but we need to talk more and soon. The will is being challenged, and there will likely be media attention once this becomes public. Media attention? Maya's voice came out as a squeak. A billionaire leaving money to a waitress he met once? It's going to make headlines, David said gently. I'm sorry. I know this isn't easy. He left his briefcase on the desk and stepped out, giving Maya a moment. Betty rushed in immediately. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. Maya couldn't form words. She just handed Betty the photograph of Richard in his tuxedo, then pointed to the will document on the desk. Betty read it, her eyes getting wider and wider. Sweet Jesus, Maya, is this real? I think so, Maya whispered. I don't know. This can't be happening. By the time Maya walked back out into the diner, Kelly and Tony had both heard bits and pieces. They stared at her like she was a completely different person. Is it true? Kelly asked. Did some rich guy really leave you millions? I don't know what's happening, Maya said honestly. She felt like she was underwater, everything muffled and strange. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She went through the motions automatically, but her mind was spinning. Richard was dead. Richard was a billionaire. Richard had left her money. People were going to think she'd tricked him. None of it felt real. When she finally got home that night, she paid the babysitter and held Sophie extra tight. Mommy, you're squishing me, Sophie giggled. Sorry, baby. I just love you so much. After Sophie was asleep, Maya sat at her tiny kitchen table and pulled out her wallet. She unfolded that napkin, looking at Richard's shaky handwriting. Thank you for seeing me. She started crying again, harder this time. She wasn't crying about the money. She was crying because a lonely old man had died, because he'd spent his last days questioning whether anyone really cared about him as a person, because the world had failed him until one random night when all she'd done was be kind. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Miss Rodriguez, this is David Chen. I wanted to let you know that the story has leaked. It's already hitting local news sites. I'm sorry. Please call me tomorrow so we can discuss how to proceed. Maya's hand shook as she opened her phone's browser. Sure enough, there it was. Chicago billionaire leaves fortune to waitress he met once. The comments were already brutal. Gold digger. Scam artist. She must have seduced him. Maya closed her phone and put her head in her hands. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out what to do. Tomorrow she'd have to face lawyers and angry relatives and the media. Tomorrow everything would be different. But tonight she just let herself grieve for Richard. For a kind old man who'd been so lonely, so hurt by the world that he'd had to disguise himself just to find one genuine human connection. I saw you, Maya whispered to the empty kitchen. I really saw you, Richard. I hope you knew that. Outside snow started to fall again, just like it had that night 2 weeks ago. The city lights glittered through her window, and somewhere out there, Maya's life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. But one thing she knew for certain, she'd done nothing wrong. She'd just been kind to someone who needed it, and somehow, that simple act had set something in motion that she was only beginning to understand. The news van showed up outside, Betty's diner 3 days later. Maya saw them through the window as she arrived for her morning shift, and her stomach dropped. There were at least 4 of them, reporters with cameras standing on the sidewalk drinking coffee and checking their phones. Waiting for her, she almost turned around and went home. But she needed this job. She needed the money. The inheritance wasn't hers yet. Might never be hers if the lawyers had their way. Her rent was due in 2 weeks and Sophie needed new shoes. Betty met her at the back door. "Come in through here, honey." "I've already told those vultures they can't come inside." Maya slipped in through the kitchen, grateful. Tony was already at the grill and he gave her a supportive nod. "Don't worry about them. We've got your back." But the moment Maya stepped into the dining area, she saw 3 reporters pressed against the front window, cameras pointing at her. They started shouting questions through the glass. "Maya, did you know Richard Wellington was rich? How long were you planning this? Is it true you manipulated an elderly man?" Maya's hands shook as she tied on her apron. This was insane. A week ago, she was invisible. Nobody paid attention to her. Now she couldn't move without someone watching, judging, making up stories about her life. Kelly came in late, staring at her phone. "Oh my God, Maya, you're trending on social media. There are like 1,000 posts about you." "I don't want to know," Maya said quietly, but Kelly kept reading anyway. "Some people are defending you, but most of them, they're calling you really awful things. They're saying you targeted him, that you probably slept with him or something." "Kelly," Betty snapped. "That's enough." Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had tables to serve. She had work to do. She couldn't fall apart now. The morning was brutal. Customers who'd been coming to Betty's for years suddenly looked at her differently. Some with pity, some with suspicion. A few asked for autographs like she was some kind of celebrity. One woman actually asked if she could take a selfie with her. During her break, Maya called David Chen. "The media attention is getting worse," she told him. "I can't do this." "I know it's hard," David said. "But we need to fight this." The Wellington cousins filed their formal contest yesterday. They're claiming undue influence and diminished capacity. What does that mean? They're saying you manipulated Richard when he wasn't thinking clearly. That he was vulnerable after his wife's death. Maya's voice rose. He wasn't confused. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was testing people. "He told me he felt alone, but he was completely aware." "I believe you," David said. "But we need to prove it. Are you willing to go to court? It's going to get ugly. They're going to try to destroy your character. They'll dig into everything about your life." Maya thought about Sophie, about the bills, about the fact that she had nothing to hide because she'd done nothing wrong. "Yes," she said, "I'll fight." She used almost all of her savings to pay David's retainer fee. It hurt watching her emergency fund drain away. But what choice did she have? The next few weeks were the hardest of Maya's life. The story went national. Suddenly everyone had an opinion about her. Strangers on the internet who'd never met her felt qualified to judge everything about her character. They analyzed her social media photos. They dug up her high school records. Someone found out that Sophie's father had left them, and the comments got even worse. Single mother? Of course she was after his money. These types always have a sob story. She probably has a whole history of scamming old men. Maya stopped reading the comments, but she couldn't escape them entirely. People at the grocery store recognized her and whispered. One woman confronted her in the cereal aisle, calling her a disgrace. The worst part was Sophie. Her daughter came home from school crying one afternoon, and Maya's heart broke into pieces. "What happened, baby?" "The kids at school are saying mean things," Sophie sobbed. "They say you're a bad person. They say you hurt someone. Tyler's mom won't let him play with me anymore." Maya held her daughter tight, fury and grief mixing in her chest. Sophie was 6 years old. She didn't deserve this. None of this was her fault. The next morning, Maya marched into the principal's office. "My daughter is being bullied because of media lies about me," she said firmly. "I need you to do something about it." The principal, Mrs. Patterson, looked uncomfortable. "Miss Rodriguez, I understand this is difficult, but we can't control what children hear at home from their parents." "Then talk to the parents. Tell them the truth. Tell them I'm fighting this in court because I did nothing wrong. The school can't take sides in a legal matter." Maya left feeling helpless and angry. The system that was supposed to protect her daughter had failed them both, but not everyone abandoned them. Betty refused to fire Maya, even though some customers complained about her working there. "This is her job," Betty told one particularly rude customer. "She's worked here for 3 years and she's the best waitress I've got. If you don't like it, there's a McDonald's down the street. Tony started walking Maya to her car after evening shifts because reporters sometimes waited for her. He didn't say much, just stayed close, making sure she was safe. Regular customers, the ones who really knew her, started speaking up. Old Mr. Patterson, who came in every Sunday for pancakes, wrote a letter to the local newspaper defending her character. "I've watched this young woman work herself to the bone to provide for her child," he wrote. "She's never asked anyone for anything. She's earned every dollar through honest work." 3 weeks into the legal battle, Maya was working a lunch shift when a woman in her 60s walked into the diner. She was well-dressed but not flashy, with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She sat at the counter and waited for Maya. "Can I get you something?" Maya asked, her customer service smile firmly in place. "Coffee, please, and a moment of your time when you're free." Something about the woman's voice made Maya pay attention. She poured the coffee and waited. "My name is Helen Thornton," the woman said. "I was Richard Wellington's personal assistant for 31 years. Maya's eyes widened. She glanced around, then leaned closer. "Did the lawyer send you?" "No," Helen said. "I came on my own. I've been watching what's happening to you, and I can't stay quiet anymore." She pulled out a folder from her purse. Richard kept detailed journals. "I was the one who typed many of his notes for him when his hands got too shaky to write. I know about his experiment. I know about every place he visited, every person he met, and I know what he wrote about you." Maya's heart was pounding. The lawyers for the cousins are trying to paint Richard as confused, as someone who could be easily manipulated, but I have proof that he was sharp as ever. He planned this for months. He documented everything. Helen pushed the folder across the counter. "This is copies of his personal records. Emails he sent me. Voice recordings where he talked about his intentions, all dated and documented." "Why are you doing this?" Maya asked. Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Because Richard was more than my boss. He was my friend. And watching his own family trash his memory, watching them claim he wasn't in his right mind, makes me sick. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to leave his money to someone who saw him as a human being, not as a wallet. That was you." Maya's hands shook as she took the folder. "Thank you. Thank you so much. There's something else," Helen said. "I have his personal journal. The original. The one he wrote in every single day, including detailed entries about meeting you and why it moved him so deeply." She pulled out a leather-bound book. Maya recognized it from when David had read from it. "Give this to your lawyer," Helen said, "and tell him to call me. I'm willing to testify. I'm willing to tell the court exactly who Richard Wellington was and what he wanted." When Helen left, Maya stood behind the counter holding that journal like it was made of gold. She carefully opened to a random page. Richard's shaky handwriting filled the lines. "The doctors say my heart is failing. I probably don't have long, but meeting Maya reminded me that the world still has good people in it. She gave me a gift and she doesn't even know it. In my darkest moment, she was light. That's worth more than all my buildings and all my money. I want her to have something. Not because she asked for it, but because she didn't." Tears dropped onto the page, and Maya quickly closed the book, not wanting to damage it. That night, she met with David and gave him everything Helen had provided. He spread it all out on his desk, reading quickly, his expression changing from interested to excited. "This is it," he said. "This is exactly what we needed. With Helen's testimony and these documents, we can prove Richard's mental clarity. We can show this was a deliberate, well-planned decision. The cousins don't have a case, are you sure?" Maya asked. "I'm sure. We're going to win this." For the first time in weeks, Maya felt like she could breathe. The suffocating weight lifted just a little. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't a criminal. She was just a woman who'd been kind to a stranger, and now she had proof. But even as relief flooded through her, she knew the fight wasn't over. There would still be court hearings, still be media attention, still be people who believed the worst about her no matter what evidence existed. As she rode the bus home that night, Maya thought about Richard, about his loneliness and his experiment, about how he'd spent his final days trying to find one genuine human connection in a world that only valued him for his wealth. She wished she could talk to him one more time, to tell him that his gift, whatever happened with it, had already taught her something important. That kindness matters even when it costs you, especially when it costs you. Sophie was already asleep when Maya got home. She stood in her daughter's doorway, watching her breathe softly, her small face peaceful in sleep. "We're going to be okay." Maya whispered. I promise. Outside, the city hummed with life. Reporters would still be waiting tomorrow. The internet would still be judging her. The legal battle would continue, but Helen had given her something more valuable than evidence. She'd given her hope. And sometimes, hope was enough to keep fighting. The courthouse was nothing like Maya had imagined. She'd seen courtrooms on TV, all dramatic and intense, but this one was just a regular room with uncomfortable chairs and fluorescent lights that buzzed too loud. It smelled like old wood and coffee. Maya sat next to David Chen at the defendant's table, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. Across the aisle sat the Wellington cousins and their team of lawyers. There were 3 cousins all dressed in expensive suits, all looking at her like she was something they'd scraped off their shoes. The oldest one, Robert Wellington, kept whispering to his lawyer and shooting her disgusted looks. His sister Patricia sat perfectly still, her face frozen in disapproval. The youngest, a man named Charles, was the only one who looked slightly uncomfortable with the whole thing. Behind Maya in the gallery sat Betty, Tony, and a handful of regular customers from the diner who'd taken time off work to support her. Mr. Patterson was there too, his old hands folded over his cane. And Helen Thornton, Richard's former assistant, sat in the front row, her expression calm and determined. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Judge Margaret Morrison was a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through people. Maya's stomach churned. Please be seated, the judge said. We're here today regarding the last will and testament of Richard Theodore Wellington III, specifically the contested bequest to Miss Maya Rodriguez. The Wellington family's lawyer stood up first. His name was Gregory Marshall, and he looked like the kind of man who charged $1,000 an hour. Everything about him screamed money and power. Your Honor, he began smoothly, this case is about a vulnerable elderly man who was taken advantage of in his time of grief. Richard Wellington lost his beloved wife of 43 years. He was depressed, isolated, not thinking clearly. And this woman, he gestured at Maya like she was evidence at a crime scene, saw an opportunity. Maya felt her face burn. David placed a hand on her arm, steadying her. The facts are simple, Marshall continued. Miss Rodriguez is a single mother who was struggling financially. She works as a waitress. She met Mr. Wellington once for less than an hour, and somehow convinced him to leave her $2 million. This is textbook undue influence. He spent 20 minutes painting Maya as a calculating predator who'd hunted down a grieving old man. With every word, Maya felt smaller. She wanted to stand up and scream that it wasn't true, but David had told her to stay quiet and let him handle it. When Marshall finally sat down, looking satisfied with himself, David stood up. Your Honor, David said, his voice calm but firm. What Mr. Marshall just described is a fantasy. It's a story the Wellington family needs to tell themselves because they can't face the truth that their wealthy relative didn't think enough of them to leave them his money. Robert Wellington's face turned red, but he stayed silent. The truth, David continued, is much simpler. Richard Wellington was a brilliant businessman who spent months conducting what he called a social experiment. He wanted to know if anyone would treat him with kindness when they thought he had nothing. He documented this experiment extensively. He was not confused. He was not manipulated. He was testing the world, and Miss Rodriguez passed that test simply by being a decent human being. David called his first witness. It was Helen Thornton. Helen walked to the stand with dignity, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. She'd worked for Richard for over 3 decades, and it showed in the way she spoke about him. Not as a boss, but as a friend. Can you describe Richard Wellington's mental state in the months before his death? David asked. He was grieving, Helen said honestly, but he was sharp. He ran board meetings. He made complex business decisions. He read financial reports. His mind was as clear as it had always been. Did he ever mention feeling pressured or influenced by anyone? No. If anything, Richard was more suspicious of people after his wife died. He felt like everyone wanted something from him. That's why he started his experiment. David pulled out Richard's journal and showed it to Helen. Do you recognize this? Yes, that's Richard's personal journal. He wrote in it every day. Sometimes his hands would shake too much, so he'd dictate entries to me and I'd write them down for him. Can you read the entry from December 15th? The night he met Miss Rodriguez. Helen opened to the marked page. Her voice was steady as she read. Tonight something remarkable happened. I met a young woman at a diner who treated me like I mattered. She didn't know who I was. She didn't want anything from me. She just saw an old man who looked cold and hungry, and she helped. No judgment. No expectations. Just pure human kindness. Her name is Maya. She has a daughter. She worked so hard, and she still found it in her heart to care about a stranger. This is what I've been looking for. Proof that goodness still exists in the world. Maya wiped tears from her eyes. Hearing Richard's words again in Helen's voice made it all real. He really had cared. This wasn't about money for him. It was about connection. Did Richard tell you he planned to change his will? David asked. Yes, he called me the very next morning. He was more energized than I'd heard him in months. He said he'd found what he was looking for. He wanted to do something meaningful with his wealth, something that would honor genuine kindness. Marshall cross-examined Helen, trying to suggest she was biased, that she was making things up to honor her former boss. But Helen didn't budge. She had emails. She had voice recordings. She had dated documentation of everything Richard had done. Richard Wellington was my friend, Helen said firmly. I respected him too much to lie about his wishes. He knew what he wanted, and he wanted Maya Rodriguez to have that money, not because she asked for it, but because she didn't. The next witness was Dr. Amanda Foster, Richard's personal physician. Did you see Mr. Wellington in the weeks before his death? David asked. Yes, I saw him 4 days before he passed. We discussed his heart condition and adjusted his medications. During that visit, did he show any signs of confusion or diminished mental capacity? None whatsoever. He was completely lucid. We discussed current events, his business, his health. He even joked with me about getting old. His mind was fine. Marshall tried to suggest that grief could cause temporary lapses in judgment, but Dr. Foster shut that down quickly. Grief is not a mental illness, she said. Richard Wellington was sad. He missed his wife. But he was fully capable of making his own decisions. I would have noted any concerns about his mental state in his medical records. And there are none. The final witness was Mr. Patterson from the diner. The old man walked slowly to the stand, leaning on his cane. He'd known Maya for 3 years, coming in every Sunday without fail. Can you tell us about Miss Rodriguez's character? David asked. Mr. Patterson smiled. Maya is one of the good ones. I've watched her work herself to exhaustion to take care of her little girl. She's never complained, never asked for help. She just does what needs to be done. Have you ever seen her treat customers differently based on how they look or how much money they have? Never. Maya treats everyone the same. Rich or poor, young or old. She gives everyone the same smile, the same service. That's just who she is. Marshall didn't even bother cross-examining. What could he say? When all the witnesses had testified, the judge called for closing arguments. Marshall stood up again, but this time he seemed less confident. Your Honor, regardless of Mr. Wellington's mental state, the size of this bequest is unreasonable. $2 million for one brief interaction? It doesn't make sense. David stood up for his final statement. Your Honor, what the Wellington family can't understand is that this was never about the interaction being brief. It was about it being genuine. Richard Wellington spent his entire life surrounded by people who wanted his money. And in his final days, he met one person who just wanted to be kind. That's priceless. That's worth everything. He paused, looking at the judge. The Wellington cousins haven't spoken to Richard in years. They didn't visit him when his wife died. They didn't check on him when he was alone. And now they want to claim his money and erase his final wishes? Richard Wellington was clear about what he wanted. He documented it extensively. He was of sound mind, and this court should honor his wishes. The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison looked at her notes for what felt like forever. Then she looked up. I've reviewed all the evidence presented, she said. The journal entries, the medical records, the testimony from people who knew Mr. Wellington well. And I've reviewed the character witnesses for Miss Rodriguez. Maya held her breath. It's clear to me that Richard Wellington was not confused. He was not manipulated. He was a man who conducted a deliberate test to find genuine human kindness in a world that often felt empty to him. And he found it in Miss Rodriguez. The judge looked directly at Maya. Miss Rodriguez, by all accounts, you didn't know who Richard Wellington was. You had no ulterior motive. You simply treated another human being with dignity and respect. That's exactly what Mr. Wellington was looking for. She turned to the Wellington cousins. As for the family's claim that this bequest is unreasonable, I disagree. Mr. Wellington had every right to leave his money to whomever he chose. The size of the bequest reflects how much that act of kindness meant to him. Judge Morrison picked up her gavel. The will stands. The bequest to Maya Rodriguez is valid and legally binding. Case dismissed. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Maya couldn't breathe. David was shaking her hand, saying something, but she couldn't hear him over the ringing in her ears. Betty was crying in the gallery. Mr. Patterson was clapping. Helen Thornton gave her a small, satisfied nod. The Wellington cousins stormed out, their lawyer trailing behind them, already on his phone. It was over. She'd won. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed immediately, but this time their questions were different. Maya, how does it feel to be vindicated? What are you going to do with the money? Do you have a message for people who doubted you? David stepped forward, professional and calm. Miss Rodriguez is grateful that the court recognized the truth. Richard Wellington was a good man who wanted to reward genuine kindness, and that's exactly what happened here. Miss Rodriguez has no further comment at this time. He guided Maya through the crowd to a waiting car. Once inside, away from the cameras and the noise, Maya finally let herself cry. Not tears of sadness this time. Tears of relief. Of release. Of finally being believed. We did it, David said softly. You did it. Maya thought about Richard. About his kind eyes and his shaky hands. About how lonely he must have been to have to disguise himself just to find one honest person. I wish I could tell him thank you, she whispered. I think he knows, David said. That night, Sophie climbed into Maya's lap while they sat on their old couch in their tiny apartment. Mommy, Tyler's mom, said she was sorry, and Tyler gave me a cookie at lunch. Maya hugged her daughter close. That's good, baby. Are we still going to be okay? Maya thought about the $2 million that was now legally hers, about how their lives were about to change. But more than that, she thought about Richard and what he'd really given her. Not just money, something bigger. A reminder that kindness matters, that being good to people, even when no one's watching, even when there's nothing to gain, that's what makes life worth living. Yeah, Maya said, kissing Sophie's head. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be great. And for the first time in a very long time, she actually believed it. 6 months had passed since the court ruling, and Maya still went to Betty's diner every morning. People thought she was crazy. You have $2 million, Kelly had said more than once. Why are you still slinging coffee and pancakes? But Maya couldn't explain it in a way that made sense to most people. This place was home. These people were family. And the money in her bank account didn't change who she was at her core. What had changed was what she did with that money. The first thing Maya did was pay off every single bill she had. Student loans from the community college classes she'd never finished. Medical bills from when Sophie had pneumonia 2 years ago. The credit card debt that had been hanging over her head like a dark cloud. Gone. All of it. Gone. For the first time in her adult life, Maya went to sleep without that constant anxiety of wondering which bill to pay first. The relief was almost physical. The second thing she did surprised everyone, including herself. Betty had mentioned one night casually that she was thinking of retiring. The diner had been in her family for 40 years, but she was getting tired. Her knees hurt. Her back hurt. She wanted to spend time with her grandchildren before they grew up. I'll probably have to sell it, Betty had said sadly. Can't imagine who'd want to buy a little place like this, though. Probably some corporation will turn it into another chain restaurant. That's when Maya knew exactly what to do. I'll buy it, she said. Betty nearly dropped the coffee pot she was holding. What? I'll buy the diner. You name a fair price and I'll buy it. 2 months later, Betty's diner officially became Maya's. Betty cried when she signed the papers. So did Maya. The regular customers threw them a party and Mr. Patterson made a toast about new beginnings and old friendships. But Maya didn't just buy the diner to own it. She had a plan. A plan that had been forming in her head ever since she'd read Richard's journal, since she'd understood what his experiment was really about. The first change she made was small but important. She put up a new sign by the register. It read, "If you're hungry and can't pay, just let us know. Everyone deserves a warm meal." Tony looked at the sign and smiled. Richard would have liked that. Yeah, Maya said softly. I think he would have. The second week after the sign went up, a young woman came in. She was maybe 19 with a backpack and scared eyes. She stood by the door for 10 minutes just looking at the sign before she finally approached Maya. Is that real? She asked quietly. The sign about free food? Completely real, Maya said with a warm smile. What can I get you? The girl cried as she ate a plate of eggs and toast. Before she left, she told Maya she'd been kicked out by her parents for being gay and was sleeping in her car. Maya gave her information about a youth shelter and a job training program. She also gave her a bag of food to take with her. You matter, Maya told her. Don't ever forget that. The girl hugged her, something desperate and grateful in the embrace. Thank you. You have no idea what this means, but Maya did know. She knew exactly what it meant to be seen when you felt invisible, to be treated like a human being when the world told you that you weren't worth anything. The program grew. Word spread. People who were struggling knew they could come to Maya's diner and get a meal. No questions asked. Some paid it forward when they got back on their feet. Some never came back, and that was okay too. Maya hired 2 additional staff members. Both were single parents who'd been struggling to find work with flexible hours. She paid them well and gave them benefits. She created a schedule that worked around their kids' school hours. You're running a charity, not a business, Kelly said one day, not unkindly. I'm running both, Maya replied. And we're doing fine, she was right. The diner was actually making more money than before. The media attention, which had been so brutal during the trial, had turned positive after she won. People came from all over Chicago to eat at that diner where the kind waitress works. Tourists, local celebrities, regular folks who just wanted to be part of something good. But the diner was just the beginning. Maya used a portion of the inheritance to establish the Richard Wellington Foundation. Its mission was simple: to help single parents get the education and job training they needed to build better lives for their families. The foundation offered scholarships for community college, job training programs, free childcare while parents were in classes, small business loans for people who wanted to start their own companies but couldn't get traditional bank financing. Helen Thornton agreed to sit on the board of directors. So did David Chen. Betty joined too, bringing her decades of business experience. They met once a month in a small office above the diner, and slowly but surely, they started changing lives. The first scholarship went to a woman named Lisa, who wanted to become a nurse but couldn't afford tuition. The second went to a man named Jerome, who'd been laid off from his factory job and wanted to learn computer programming. By the end of the first year, the foundation had helped 43 people. Each one of them received a letter with their acceptance that included a quote from Richard's journal. Kindness is an investment that pays dividends forever. Maya also did something for Sophie's school. She established a scholarship fund in honor of Richard's late wife, Elizabeth Wellington. It paid for school supplies, field trips, and after-school programs for kids whose families couldn't afford them. The principal, Mrs. Patterson, called her personally. Miss Rodriguez, this is incredibly generous. Do you want us to put your name on it? No, Maya said. Put Elizabeth Wellington's name on it. She deserves to be remembered. Sophie was thriving now. The bullying had stopped once Maya won the case. More than that, Sophie seemed proud of her mom. She told her classmates about the free meals at the diner and the foundation that helped families. My mom says everyone deserves kindness, Sophie announced in class one day during a discussion about helping others. Her teacher later told Maya it sparked the most thoughtful conversation she'd had with students in years. The months rolled into a year. The anniversary of Richard's death approached, and Maya felt it like a weight on her chest. She'd never properly grieved him, not really. Everything had been so chaotic, so overwhelming that she'd barely had time to process that he was gone. She visited his grave for the first time on a cold morning in January. It was in an expensive cemetery on the edge of the city, with elaborate headstones and carefully maintained grounds. Richard's grave was marked with a simple stone that read, Richard Theodore Wellington III and Elizabeth Ann Wellington. Together forever. Maya placed flowers on the grave and sat down on the cold ground. Hi, Richard, she said softly. I don't know if you can hear me, but I want.